There are so many wonderful stories with me and the Remington Model 700. Obviously, the first deer that I took is very special to me. It was a very special firearm. I could set a very small styrofoam coffee cup with full of water at 100 yards and drill that with that gun every time, and the water would just leak out. So I was deathly accurate with that firearm, and I proved that with the first deer that I ever shot. That was special. Another time is my first elk. I shot one of my first elk with a Model 700 rifle. And it was about 100 yards distance. It was a surprise. The elk was just there all of a sudden. I was able to take that shot. The elk ran off, but it fell within about 100 yards, and I felt really excited about that. Another time it was the largest elk that I ever shot. I had put in my points for years in Colorado to get drawn into a trophy unit, and had the opportunity to go. I cashed my points in. I went on the hunt. And opening day, we should have filmed that hunt. It's just like you see on TV. I had a guide. He was a senior in high school, but an excellent caller, hunting on terrain that he had hunted for years. And we had hunted in the morning and seen a small herd, but no big bulls in that. And then he bugled, and forgive me, but I have to tell the story exactly the way I always tell it. He'd bugle on the call, he'd go, and we'd wait a second, and all of a sudden we heard this bull answer. Well, he was just in front of us on a little point on a north slope, dropped off in some dark timber. And we could tell he was just over the slope. And he said to me, "I think you better get ready. He might come." I looked at him and said, "What do you mean get ready?" He said, "Get up there about 20, 30 yards in front of me, lean up against a tree." I said, "Okay." So I get up there next to the tree, and I'm waiting. I've got my Model 700, 300 Winchester mag right here ready to go. And he calls again. And before he could finish, the elk was answering him, and it was closer. And he and I started to turn to look at the guide, and he was already making his way to me. And he got it shoulder to shoulder with me, and he said, "He's coming, be ready." So I'm standing there, I'm ready, you know, and I'm waiting. And then all of a sudden, he bugles one more time to see if he can get him to answer. And I'm looking, and he answers this time, but a whole lot closer still. And then the guide looks at me and says, "I see him." And I'm looking, and all I see is this tawny thing kind of coming through the aspens. Now, he's up on the same level with us, out of the dark timber. And then all of a sudden, he stops and bugles one more time for us. And my guide has got his binoculars up, and he's watching this elk. And as he's bugling, my guide's breathing goes from normal to, as soon as he steps out, shoot him right away, he's huge. And just like somebody slapped him on his rear end, the elk turned and ran right at us. So he's about 120 yards away. I flip the safety off, I get the gun up, and I'm on him, and he's coming, and I'm thinking, well, as long as he's coming, let him come. And he gets to about 40 yards away, and the guy leans over and says, "Shoot!" I go, boom! Well, I hit the elk and rock him back a little bit, and instead of jumping off into the dark timber, he actually went across the other direction on this little rise that we were on. And I racked the bolt, got back on target, put one more in him, and he went over the little knoll. Well, I knew I had an empty round in the chamber, so I went running up to the top of that little knoll, and hopefully to see where the elk went. And I looked, and he was 40 yards away from me with his head down and falling down. So that was a phenomenal story. That bull, when we walked up to it, I could see that he was a big elk. And the guide was bear hugging me and doing high fives and wondering why I wasn't tremendously excited. He said, "You don't know what you've just done." I said, "Well, I've shot a nice elk." And he said, "No, you may have shot the biggest elk we've ever taken on this mountain." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, it'll probably go in the record book." So anyway, we process the elk and we get it back, and then after all the drying time and everything that has to go on, we measured it. and it scored 365 Boone and Crockett points, big enough to go in the book.